interested, you're welcome to have a look at them. If you're not interested, then you could just skip those and still get to the notes, where the quiz questions are. I think are the main interest of a lot of folks. But the responses I've been getting back from Groke are exactly what I'm hoping to get. And it worries me that Groke has figured out what I like and is just giving me what I'm looking for without giving me the variety of possible answers that would include disagreement with my overall. And I'm sure there's disagreements over practically everything that I've asked him. So I even emailed one of you this morning who I know disagrees with me on at least a few issues, for them to use Groke to see what response they get. But I haven't heard back from them yet, so that should be interesting. But if any of you do use, yes, go ahead.
Have you ever tried Google Gemini?
No, I have not.
It's free for students for pro mode right now, for a whole year. It's really great.
I'm still a student.
I don't know if you'd be counted as a student. I think you just need a UAA login to get it for free.
Well, that might, I don't do it. I've got one of those. I got an email this, actually the first one was a couple weeks ago. That I got an email, it was from UA, University of Alaska, and said that I needed to take a internet security course, and I thought, aha, that looks like a scam, so I didn't do anything with it, didn't click on it or anything. But this last week, I got another email from them saying that I only had 30 days or else, and I don't know what the or else could have been, but so I went into the IT office over in over by the spine and asked them, and they said, well, forward it to us. So I forwarded it to them, and they looked at it and they said, nope, this is legitimate, go ahead and do it. So it took me a little bit over 20 minutes to answer this this training program to make sure that I was internet savvy and aware of how secure, how all these hackers are out there trying to hack us and everything. And I finished. Very annoying, few interesting word choices. The word hacker they were using. Hacker engineers or something, but what they were calling them were people who were basically fooling people, not actually hacking like software. So that kind of fooled me initially, but so I'm savvy with that. But it just seems so ironic that it could have been a scam, that I got an email that I had to click on this stuff and learn what scams are all about. Oh well. But so I did a whole bunch of Groke questions. So I grouped Luther. I don't know if you're interested in yes. Go ahead.
Do you actually go through and read all of our answers to those questions and respond individually?
Yes. No. I have a plethora of responses that I've used over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So I read what you say, and then usually I can just pick one of my already made responses to send back.
Okay. Because I was like, no way. I send this, and then an hour and a half later it gets sent back.
Oh no, I've had discussions all night with them on the same day actually.
I don't have a life.
I wasn't gonna say that, so thank you for saying that.
Well, this is.
I'll be sleeping and he'll send me a response. I'm like,
This is life. of people think it's a life, you know, they want to like walk the dogs. Actually, I do walk the dogs. It was very embarrassing last night. I had them out loose, and somebody else came walking their dog on a leash, and my dogs ran over, and it was so embarrassing. However, my dogs trained me pretty well, but I haven't trained them, so you know that's kind of annoying. However, so I have a life. On tomorrow, Donna and I are celebrating our 53rd wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
And Donna still remembers who I am.
it's a bonus.
She does. She does laugh at my jokes. They're all new. No, Donna is getting it. You know, she was having trouble last night because she was trying to refill the soap dispensers from the main bottle, but she used one of the soap dispenser bottles to fill the other one, and then she was trying to figure out where did the bottle go. And, well, that's stuff you get to hopefully have fun doing when you're in your 70s or something like that. However, it is officially 11:30, so class has started, and I want to first point out a couple things that I didn't touch on with St. Thomas Aquinas. If you're merging Aristotle with the church dogma as he did, you do create kind of this double explanation of things. The contemporary explanation of that would have been, model-based realism or model-dependent realism, the Stephen Hawking way of talking about it, or different meta-narratives. He's using more than one model in order to explain the scripture and reason. And his goal is to incorporate Aristotelian reason, even though Aristotle was a pagan philosopher, with the church dogma. Of course, there's a lot of people that are not happy about it at all. By the way, one of the interesting things about that, remember Aristotle believed that the soul was the activity of the body. So if you think, wow, how did Aristotle's theory of the soul impact Aquinas? Aquinas accepted that idea that the soul is the activity of the body. As a result, when the body dies, the question is then, well, what happens to your soul? It's not like it goes on to heaven. Remember, the problem with post-Aristotelian thinking is you have to figure out how to have a good life here and now. It's not like you can figure out what kind of life you will lead your soul to be able to go to heaven and be as unencumbered by our attachments to the earth as possible. The soul is actually the body. The activity of the body requires a body. So that gets into a whole bunch of problems associated with the second coming. When you think about the second coming, how many folks know what the second coming is supposed to be?
Right?
Yes.
Yesterday.
Yes. I saw one of those comedians on YouTube, and she was talking about a second coming, and she meant something totally different. Sorry. That's just true. She did, and I was horrified. I couldn't believe she was talking about that, especially since she was talking about Jesus, talking about how. Well, forget it. I don't want to go on that. In any case, for Aquinas, the soul isn't there unless you have a body. So, for Aquinas, the resurrection has to, the second coming, and we are resurrected, has to include our bodies. So that's clearly an interesting dilemma, and especially if you're thinking that as soon as you die, your soul is released and can go to heaven or wherever it's going to go. With Aquinas, you're stuck in the grave until that resurrection occurs. And that, as far as I understand it, that's still a problem for the church, because of course there's the inherited belief that the soul is released and can go to heaven right from the beginning at death, whereas if you're following Aristotle, that's not correct. Well, so that leads people like Martin Luther to end up reacting. What caused Martin Luther, who was an Augustinian, PhD type professor of theology in Germany, and nonetheless he ends up hanging his 90, how many theses? 92, I never remember exactly, 90 something theses on the church door, which is kind of like the bulletin board, etc. Although there are arguments over that. Somebody immediately took them down and took them and printed them off and then shared them with hundreds of people, because part of what makes Martin Luther an interesting person is that now they have a printing press and all of his writings get printed on books that have multiple copies. So the church, which used to think that they could just destroy the writings of somebody and that would be the end of their influence, suddenly discovered that you couldn't succeed in squashing somebody's influence once there was a printing press and hundreds or even thousands of copies could be spread all over the place. And he was writing in German for people, right? In fact, one of the things that Martin Luther did was translate the Latin Vulgate, the Bible, into German. So think about it. That means people, at least those with enough money, could buy a very expensive book and read it without having been trained in Latin and being already a theologian. And this process, which took place not only in Martin Luther's German, but also you ended up with the Tyndale Bible in English, which actually got Tyndale burned at the stake for trying to do that. And by the way, we have a copy of the Tyndale, a facsimile of the Tyndale Bible in our library here at the Consortium, which includes a plate of Tyndale burning at the stake, which is, you feel like visiting and looking at it. It's in the large book section, by the way. But that became the groundwork for the King James version of the Bible, the English translation. There was also a Welsh Bible. There was so in other words, what we see is a translation effort of translating things into the languages that people were speaking, especially for the upper class people, because we do have a beginning of a business class of what would eventually become known as the Fourth Estate, right? So it makes it really difficult to get rid of their influence, because now we have a new tool called the printing press and the translation effort. By the way, we'll talk today, the two people that I'm especially going to try to focus on are René Descartes and Thomas Hobbes. And we'll talk about them both today and Wednesday. On the syllabus, I have Descartes today and Hobbes on Wednesday, but they really live concurrently. Hobbes is about 8 years older than Descartes and dies a lot later because Descartes gets killed by Queen Christina, not on purpose. Queen Christina was the Queen of Sweden, and she invited, scare quotes, right? When a queen invites you, you go, right? And Descartes had to go to Sweden, where she insisted that he gets up early in the morning, about 5 a.m., to teach her how to draw tangents and other mathematical things. And as a result, he ended up getting sick, the flu or pneumonia, whatever, and he died. So everybody blames Queen Christina for killing Descartes. By the way, that also caused a problem, because when his body was shipped back to France, somebody stole the head. Someone eventually came forth with the head, and who knows if it's really the head or not. The head was worth a lot of money, I guess. In any case, the head and the body never actually got back together, because if you go to France, where the head is in one museum, oh, I don't want that one. I want the skull. So you could go to the one museum in France, and you can see his skull, and notice it's even got stuff written on it, which is interesting. But his body is in the crypt across the street. And by the way, this was pointed out to me by A.C. Grayling, who is one of the philosophers I have on the list. And he points out that Descartes' philosophy gives us the mind-body problem. The mind is spiritual and the body is physical, and how are they connected? And he points out that even though he's a mind-body dualist, in reality, his mind and body were separate. As you could, if you go visit, the two places, his mind and body are separated. That's just fun. That's fun stuff. But so back to Luther. Luther is going to rebel against St. Thomas. He has nothing against St. Thomas in person, of course. Notice there was quite 1517 verses 1265 to 1274, so it's not he actually ever knew St. Thomas, but he was against this medieval scholasticism. Scholasticism isn't invented by St. Thomas, but his period of theology is associated with scholasticism. It's considered very complex. You have to know all of the things that are going on and how to say things exactly right so that you don't end up screwing up the matrix of all this interrelated theology, right? You have to know the whole thing. In fact, you have to be familiar with the sentences. And St. Thomas has his own collection of the sentences. Yes, okay. So Peter Lombard was the one whose sentences were the most famous at the time. And what these were, here's a perfect example, right? You have the page of the Bible, right? But on the sides, what you have are the sentences that you would have written in the side of the page explaining the lines that you were looking at, right? Because it's very complex. You're talking about lots of different interpretations of all the different things and so on. And as a result, understanding how complex and getting the interpretations just right were an important part of it. And that was your test, essentially, before you could become a theologian, was to be able to do your own collection of sentences and have them approved, glosses and so on, etc. And the way you could actually go over to the library, of course, and you can look up, these kinds of documents on Bibles. So if you think, well, here's a Bible today. We have them in a nice, neat book that you can basically carry, with all the different books and everything in it. But if you go and you look at the comments on the Bible, the commentary is usually a whole shelf full. So people have written whole shelves full to correspond with the pages of the Bible to explain how to correctly interpret everything. And of course, the job is to interpret things, many of which are stories and so on. The Psalms, how How do you incorporate psalms, some of which are sexy, and so on? How do you incorporate all of that into a system that essentially is supposed to give a particular theme that is coherent throughout the whole thing? So, part of what theologically prompts the Protestant Reformation, and keep in mind, Luther was not trying to create a new religion. He was trying to reform the church and not create a new religion. And remember, when you think about all of the different